And welcome to today's Dark Reading webinar, Identity in Flux, Navigating What's Next for IAM Leaders in 2026, sponsored by Cerby and broadcast by Informa Tech Target. Terry Sweeney here, contributing editor with Dark Reading. I'll be your moderator for today's discussion. It's safe to say that identity programs have entered a period of transformation, like most of the security landscape. AI adoption is driving a lot of that and creating lots of excitement and concern in its wake. Also some compliance expectations that are rising alongside it. Users are adopting applications faster than IT can govern them, and identity sprawl, disconnected systems, and poorly controlled credentials put new pressures on IT and security teams. With all that in mind, our speakers will be breaking down what the next 18 months will mean for identity and access management and for security leaders. They'll examine legacy identity practices that impede progress here, as well as how to modernize governance at scale. They'll also be looking at where AI is creating both new risks and new tooling opportunities. On that note, I'm excited to introduce our speakers. I'm joined by Lepe, co-founder and CEO of Cerby. He's joined by Yousuf Khan, venture partner from Ridge Ventures, and also a former CIO. Gentlemen, welcome, and thank you so much for doing this webinar today.
Thanks, Terry. Great to see you.
Before I hand it over to you, Bel, I just wanted to remind our audience of a couple of logistics. If you've been here before, you know this webinar is designed to be interactive between you and the speakers. At the bottom of the screen, there are buttons you can click on to learn about today's speakers, download a copy of the slides, and also share this webinar on social media. This is also where you'll participate in the Q&A session that takes place at the end of today's presentation. You can also use that Q&A window to let us know if you're having any technical issues, and our team will do their best to assist you. Okay, I think that's it from my side. Bel, Yousuf, the floor is yours.
Excellent. Well, Terry, thank you so much. And Yousuf, always an honor to be able to share the stage with you, virtual here, but regardless, looking forward to this conversation. And to our audience, thank you to those of you joining us live and to those of you that are watching this after the fact. Very excited about this conversation. So as Terry mentioned, we are at a very exciting point in the trajectory of identity. We are seeing now that more and more, there's the cliched line of identity is the new perimeter, but it's become increasingly obvious that that there's actually money being put behind that statement. And so where we wanted to start the conversation today is talking a little bit about some of the headlines that we've been tracking that we believe are very much pace setting and context setting for where we are, generally speaking, with regard to identity, and then also how we want to be talking about identity over the course of these next several minutes. And so, Yousuf, feel free to jump in at any point in time, but one of the backdrop items that we want to talk about, again, is this idea of identity as the new perimeter. It is a sentiment that has been uttered for at least the last 5 years, but what is very fascinating about what's been happening over the last 3 to 4 months is you're actually seeing money being put behind that statement, right? I'd argue with Palo Alto Networks, they kind of broke the ice with their announcement of the acquisition of CyberArk for $25 billion. And then in fairly quick succession, you saw other multi-hundred million, billion in some cases, investments, whether it's Savient or ServiceNow's acquisition of Veza, or CrowdStrike more recently, signaling their intention to acquire Signal. And so this is the context that we're in, right? Everyone is realizing that, again, identity is the new perimeter. And if they do not have, and I'm saying this more from the vendor side, if they don't have an investment in identity, they are making very major investments to acquire those capabilities. And so, Yousuf, maybe starting there, I'd love to get your thoughts on how are you looking at some of these investments and what do you think they indicate?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, I think it's really important to talk about the fact that ultimately identity has now become a much bigger component of both the security budget in general. I think that's increased probably at a pretty exponential pace over the course of the last, I would say, probably 5 years. I mean, Veza was founded in 2020. I was helped the founder, Tarun Takara, at the early stages when that company was being formed. And prior to that, of course, it saw, you know, the IPOs of companies like Okta and others come into place. But I think the real transformation and prioritization of identity and identity management has really come to a level of maturity, as you pointed out. Part of the validation in that, of course, has been the acquisitions. But let's actually talk about why that is. From my standpoint, having been both a CIO and a CISO in standing in a number of companies, what we've discovered, and I speak to a number of CISOs just like you do, is that ultimately the landscape of the enterprise has really become multi-platform and has done so in a very accelerated pace. Initially, it was just kind of the core on-prem applications, the enterprise applications that we're using, as of course the emergence of more cloud and SaaS came into place. That started to come into place from a perspective of just management of those identities. And people said, well, just integrate it into your single sign-on provider or otherwise. But it wasn't simple as just access. It's actually about the data that's going in. It's about the fact that you are now having companies that have a much closer customer experience. Like if you are able to, if it's easier for you to be able to create an application and therefore, and put that on the App Store, for example, or be able to distribute that on the web, and actually increase the marketing of that application in social media and other channels. Ultimately, you have more eyeballs and you have people who are looking to access that application either as a partner, either as a customer, and of course, vendors or otherwise. And so I think the harsh reality is that people underestimated how big of a real estate an enterprise needs to have. I mean, if you just look at a standard company, you are looking to basically consolidate people to be able to access data, to be able to run workflows. It may well be as simple as a vendor accessing a procurement portal. It may be a partner that is adding in information for a partner event. It may be a customer accessing access to their account. It may be, contractors, for example. So that has really evolved and exploded as a result of customers and companies evolving their products and wanting to get closer to their constituents, right? But that comes at a cost. It comes at being able to manage it from a cost perspective. It comes from managing it from a security perspective, and then being able to actually analyze and figure out how to basically make sense out of it. So I think people have thought, well, identity, must be, let's just accessing your cloud environment or Snowflake, like what Veza has done, or like Cerby has done, to be able to say, look, all the unmanaged applications. And I think that's one of the things that I was excited when we looked at your company, was the fact that you are solving a problem that has been around for a while, but needs to be solved for. And the latency and appreciation and recognizing that as a problem is the opportunity. But that is that's really a parallel to what's happened in the identity industry as a whole. Like people have realized, whoa, there's actually more people that we need to be able to manage and provide a good experience for. How are we going to do it? It turns out that there's a very big market for those solutions. So that's the way I've come to have a reading of it.
Absolutely. No, that's a fantastic segue into one of the key topics that we're going to talk about around identity sprawl across, the growing application landscape. To put some numbers behind some of the trends that you've mentioned, there was a recent survey, I believe it was by PwC just in this month, in which they surveyed a number of IT and security professionals, and 84% of them said that they were expecting to increase the amount of investment that they were doing into identity and access management. And across that group, the average percentage that identity and access management is going to take up of the overall pie was between 20 and 30%, up from 10 to 15. So it's a substantial increase that we're seeing. And Yousuf, to your point, it is this realization that identity is the attack surface, but I think it's important to double click into that. How is it, the new perimeter? How is it the new attack surface? We do a lot of work with both highly and quick kind of background on Cerby, as Yousuf mentioned. We focus on the last mile of identity. We help organizations like L'Oreal and Fox and Dentsu protect the applications that historically have been unmanaged. And one of the key trends that we've seen from our customers that are both in the highly regulated spaces as well as are of more of a consumer brand, consumer technology type, is that when they look at the threat activity over the last half decade, more often than not, the initial point of entry is an unmanaged identity. It is a username and password for a partner, right? For example, one of our common use cases is helping to protect the marketing stack. And the number of times we hear about a situation where the marketing team lost advertising spend because a partner identity for an agency that they don't manage was compromised, well, it happens a whole lot more than you would expect. And so one of the motivators for this, for the focus on identity and, in a more comprehensive fashion, is that there's a realization that you need to be looking at all forms of identity, not just within the organizational boundary, but beyond the organizational boundary, protecting what your partners use, protecting those government reporting portals maybe that you use if you're a Fortune 2000 to report out, quarterly earnings. They are all valid entry points for an attacker. And if you are a business that has achieved any sort of revenue traction, these are components that you need to be, mindful of. Now, Yousuf, maybe a question back towards you. You've been a CIO now multiple times. I'm curious, as you look at this backdrop, the attack surfaces becoming not only larger, but the ability for the threat actors to go after more of that attack surface comprehensively is also becoming, they're more able to do it because of AI. How would you encourage folks in a similar position as a CIO, leader of IT, leader of security, to think about investments in the time ahead?
Yeah, so I think, so first and foremost, I think we have to recognize, and CIOs and CISOs have to recognize, that identity management is a full-time job. It requires focused and dedicated effort. In the past, you could kind of have this as a part of a role for a system administrator when they were, say, rolling out a single sign-on solution for access. But the harsh reality now is that because of just the sprawl, the number of applications, the platforms that you're using, identity needs to be managed in a full-time focus. So that would be first and foremost. The second is you should actually look at this as a strategic initiative from the security perspective. It's a way to be able to measure it. It's a way to be able to demonstrate that you're able to reduce security risk and improve your cybersecurity posture. And that's, for example, one of the things that Cerby is able to do. You're able to discover a number of applications and say, look, let's go and get these all integrated and in a place where there is good hygiene in place and it's following best practice. And then the third, ultimately, comes down to really focusing on being able to run a good program when it comes to looking at new vendors or new solutions that sort of come into place, and to be able to make sure, like even now in 2026, the number of applications that are coming into an enterprise which don't have a good identity posture or security posture, it's not just like SOC 2 type 2 with your vendor. I think it has to be deeper than that. If you are integrating into an environment, have a thoughtful conversation about thinking about what data they actually access, how that should be audited, how it should basically run. And that just requires to be a little bit strategic about it. I think overarching this, I think CIOs need to understand that it's a multifaceted problem. I think it's going to grow. And I don't think, and you have to remember, is like, I think as CIOs have now deployed more software, built more software, as they've bought more software, ultimately what happens is that the identity attacks are just going to be accelerating through not just the use case of AI, but because it's like there are multiple points of entry. And so as a result of that, people are, there is a trade-off. You can say, well, I'm just going to have one monolithic application, but that doesn't exist anymore. That's not really a concept that has ever worked. And so ultimately, you need to have a understanding and appreciation of that. And so you have the right partners in place to be able to do that. Hopefully, Cerby is one of those. But you have to actually have this as an identity stack versus thinking it as just part of a larger stack. That's the way I would frame to it.
Absolutely, absolutely, and again, I'm a big fan of numbers, and with my, since we're on the topic of AI, I have my trusty AI copilot here in the form of Gemini feeding me statistics, but some of the statistics that support what you're saying. The average enterprise has around 370 applications, right? To your point about the surface area that they need to be protected. But typically, IT team is the ITT team and security team is unaware of 40% of them, right? And so that's the situation now. And I'd love to maybe get your perspective on this. The fascinating thing about security is that by definition, historically it has been very asymmetric, which is a attacker only needs to be successful once for them to do damage, whereas a defender, typically on the enterprise or corporate side, they effectively need to be perfect across the board in order for you to say that they have been successful. And so you have that situation. And then you also have the situation where you don't necessarily want to slow down the pace of innovation for your employees. You want them to experiment, right? You want them to be able to go out and use the latest and greatest technologies. But you end up in a situation where, again, another recent survey indicates that a typical enterprise of 500 or more employees will be using north of 100 different AI-powered point solutions. I mean, just crazy, right? And 15% of the time, employees are putting sensitive data into those platforms. And so, still on that topic of investments, and as a former CIO, how do you balance that contention and that risk of enabling your employees to be able to experiment, but not putting the business at substantial risk in the process of doing so?
Well, you do that by understanding and appreciating the level of risk that you're willing to take and the impact of bad posture as well as bad security practices and what that means. I mean, the challenge that CIOs and CISOs typically have will always be about prioritization, how much risk they are willing to accept. And ultimately, what that comes down to is aligning yourself and your strategy around corporate objectives. And if you take the most fundamental ones, which are customer experience and customer data, and be able to look at revenue profitability, like security strategy is now directly linked to revenue generation. Okay, if you have a breach in a company, ultimately customers lose trust in that company, and that's not the chief marketing officer's job. That's not the chief procurement officer's job. That's the CISO's job. And I think that's where a large part of the industry has to wake up to the fact that their work has a considerable impact on the company, right? And I think that's, so first and foremost is put the customer and put the corporate strategy at the very heart of your strategy, and then work your way down to be able to actually understand and figure out what those risks are. One of the challenges that a lot of CISOs and CIOs have is they are not able to adequately articulate and advocate for being able to give bigger priority and bigger investment on the security side. And so my hope is that that's something that you are able to do when you're able to go to customers and to be able to give them. And I think the data you're sharing, as much as stats are stats, like this is useful education and enablement that's required in the industry. People need to be able to actually understand how big a problem this is and what it could lead to. If you think about some of the biggest breaches that have typically happened, we can go through the list. 23andMe, they didn't have two-factor authentication on customer identity. Guess what? The company barely exists anymore, right? It just went through and went through, pretty much got destroyed in value. Target, the CEO, got fired. Why? Well, because somebody's able to get into a place into their EPOS system. If you think about Home Depot, prior to that was also due to basic. So somewhere down the line, there's identity is related. Access to your systems is related, and so you've got to understand the downstream impact of not doing this well. It requires you to be thoughtful to be able to have a strategy in place to do it. I think the other big thing I would highly recommend is to really push both vendors and figure out a way to be able to run a program of audit and being able to do that. Some of the examples you mentioned, when we first started talking, years ago, it was kind of obvious. to a certain extent, but it wasn't being dealt with. And I think the other thing with the AI piece is important is the non-human identity piece is now starting to become much more of a bigger issue, because agents, of course, are being deployed. Agents are not just being deployed centrally when you're looking to do a customer service solution that you want to sort of put into place. But yeah, there's a bunch of people vibe coding. There's a bunch of people being able to do that. You can't solve all of those problems. Let's be real. Like, you can't go to, you can do as much as you can to tell an employee, well, don't share this sensitive data or mask it this way if you're going to ask ChatGPT, but there's only so much you can base control. There's a level of accepted risk there. What you can do is what within your control in terms of best practice and to be able to drive that further forward.
Absolutely, absolutely, and so many important bits of guidance there. Again, just to highlight a few of them from a statistics perspective. Starting with non-human identities, the numbers that I've seen indicate that in the typical enterprise, for every one employee, there are usually 100 machine identities, and so. Wow, I mean, talk about a asymmetric ratio there. I mean, that's a lot of machine identities, and all of them need to be appropriately permissioned. And let's be honest, more often than they're not, right? More often than not, the OAuth token that they've been given gives them far more access than they should have. And then to your point about CISOs and CIOs and other IT and cybersecurity leaders, helping them articulate what's at stake. A recent customer case study that we launched was with Monday.com. And what is so fascinating about that case study that we launched is that the narrative that we've been able to tell together as customer and vendor is not just about improving the security posture of these 200 applications that they were not able to otherwise manage by way of Okta, which is their identity provider, but also being able to tell the story of the productivity gains that they've gotten from working with Cerby. And so, this is potentially an obvious statement, but security and productivity, believe it or not, actually go hand in hand. I think historically, and certainly prior to the AI era, the perspective was that proper security meant inconveniencing the end user from a user experience perspective. But now what you're able to do, certainly with platforms like Cerby, is you're able to both improve the security posture and make your employees more productive. So what are examples of that? At customers like Monday and others that we've worked with, we would see numbers like an average of 2 to 5 business days for an employee to get access to an application that they requested access to, which is mind-boggling, right? Think about all the lost productivity while you're waiting to get that ServiceNow ticket completed. And with a platform like Cerby, we're able to reduce that down to less than 5 minutes. And so using the right tooling, using the right automation, training your employees on how to leverage these capabilities, both for your connected applications that do support standards and for your applications that don't support the standards, which is our focus area. When you're able to get a consistent approach working across the business, it has a tangible impact, not just on improving the security posture, but also in terms of improving the productivity of each individual user. And so we help our customers, we enable them to be able to tell that story. And we find that that's a compelling story because it's, again, not just about these soft savings that you might drive. They're hard savings around productivity that materialize. And I'm curious, Yousuf, from your perspective as a CIO, have you found that that's a compelling way to tell that story, to articulate why investment in this area is necessary?
So I think yes, but I think there's one additional piece to it, is that ultimately you can try and automate as much as you can on some of your processes on the identity side, and to be able to drive that further forward. And so I was startled by that stat. I think that would be supremely problematic. But I think there's other aspects to it. For example, there's just basic aspects of cost, right? I mean, if you do not manage this, the additional cost of just seats and data ingest that maybe a particular application, because it's tied to an identity, is put into place, it's going to go through the roof. So the ROI piece, like is real, and you just like having a good process and having focus in this area is going to be helpful from a bottom line dollar perspective. Second is you can weigh the costs and implications of a major breach as a result of identity, PR, reputation, customer brand, all of that stuff, versus how much you want to be able to spend on being able to solve this problem. Okay? And I think that's also important to be able to talk about. Third is it's also about experience. I think most people sort of forget this. Like if you think about having a much more unified, like, you know, if you don't have a good identity strategy, the people who you are providing access to will start to get a negative experience. I mean, they'll start to feel, well, why was I able to either not log in, or was I not able to access? Or by the way, if it's so easy for me to either bypass or, you know, not basically be tracking some of this stuff, then what does that mean for my data? I mean, that's ultimately, sometimes it comes down to that. Companies that have had breaches, when it comes down to it, you lose trust. You're like, well, you know, a lot of my data is now out there. Now, look, I'm not saying that, you know, there's more breaches happening there before, but if you are a CIO and a CISO, you need to be able, it's better for you to have a robust plan, be able to basically drive towards that success, and understand that there is a much wider impact positively towards the entire company. And productivity is part of it, but productivity and improvement of that has a number of other benefits that sort of come as a result of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, where I see some difficulty as we're working with our IT and cyber security counterparts is quantifying that, right? Because it is very possible to, at a high level, understand and appreciate that. But when, you know, dollars hit the spreadsheet and you're presenting to the CFO, it's, you know, how do you quantify that? And, you know, another anecdote that I think is very helpful, you know, with one of our other customers, similar situation to Monday, where we're managing about 250 applications that have historically sat outside the identity perimeter. After we onboarded the first 50 or so applications, we identified about $250,000 worth of licenses that were assigned to individuals who were no longer at the business. And so, you know, there's, to your point, Yousuf, about hard costs and hard savings. I mean, you know, that is one of the nice benefits when you're running a proper, consistent, predictable identity access and governance program across all of your applications.
Yeah.
Now oh, sorry. Did you have something you want to mention?
Well, I think the point I'm making is it all adds up. If you think about it, it really all adds up, and it comes down to the center of it. One thing to basically add is the number one threat every single time in every CISO server for the last 5 years is always been phishing, and the fact that there is an employee who will unfortunately click on a particular link, and look, they're getting more sophisticated than ever before, right? So if we appreciate and understand that will always be a threat vector that it's going to be difficult to close, then let's work our way backward and say, well, if that's the case, what are they going to probably divulge? One, of course, is the fact that you click on something and it's ransomware. But the other piece is, as you run an identity program, for example, employees, you're helping to improve cybersecurity posture and awareness for them, you know, as a result of that they're able to understand that that's the subtext. Like when you put in, you know, authentication, when you're able to basically say, okay, here are the practices we have in place, they themselves, as a result, appreciate that, and it becomes something that they become a little bit awareness of. And so I think it's important to be able to point that out.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that strategy or that sentiment of it all adds up, and there are multiple layers to how you should be thinking about your identity perimeter. I think that's also represented in a lot of the broader macro movements that we're seeing here, where they're doubling up on different identity capabilities. And so I think the vendors definitely acknowledge that. We're now at about the halfway point. And one additional topic that I wanted us to tackle here before we open it up to Q&A. And it's on the topic of AI moving fast and raising risk. And maybe as we've sort of been touching on AI, but as we touch on the topic a little bit more, maybe starting with a fun question. I'm curious, Yousuf, both wearing your CIO hat and also your investor hat, what have you been most excited about from an AI perspective within the enterprise? You know, whether it's a particular platform or tool that you're spending a lot of time on, or trends that you're tracking very closely?
Yeah, so I think, I've spoken to tons of founders, of course, as part of the job, but also speak to a number of CIOs and CISOs, and I think that's been the kind of community that I've been embedded in. Here are the few key things I'm saying, which I can safe to say are a real thing and are basically making traction. Code generation, for sure. I think solutions out there that are really having an impact. The productivity uplift that is sort of coming in from those is real. I don't think that should be a surprise. But what should be a surprise is the use cases that people focus on. For example, cognition, original creators of Devin. The solution is fantastic when you speak to CIOs about the backlog that they are unlocking in their work. If you think about Claude Code and Cursor, those have been phenomenal for not just backlog, but also net new applications. So I think code generation continues to be something that it's really, really impactful, and companies are looking at. I think the second is really, and this is much more not emotive, but it is the fact that the emergence of AI, it's just captured so much more mind share that it has opened up both the imagination and drive to be able to really transform an organization from all aspects. It's not just, CIOs are at the heart of it because they're more involved in being able to bring this all together and make it real by enabling the right platforms and overseeing the right level of security, and as well as able to integrate the data. But, definitively, it's clear that, people have woken up to the fact that, and it could be as experimentation as vibe coding. I'd like to say that you can't vibe code your way into enterprise. It's not really the way to do it, but you can look to make things what you've been thinking about a reality, or at least see what they look like. And I think that's that definitively. And you look at companies like Replit, which have seen an explosive growth. I think that's worked out really, really well. I think the third piece has really been about looking at data and how now more precious and valuable it is as an asset. The use of data in an enterprise that is being used for training, number one. Number two, it's also very messy. And I think that's one of the challenges that I continue to consistently hear from CIOs is that a lot of AI projects are failing because of the issues in data quality. And so work that needs to be done to be able to clean and organize unstructured data is required. And I think that's super important to do. But generally speaking, like the infrastructure, it's been 3 years post ChatGPT, right? And so we've got to be thoughtful about why there are a lot of AI projects that are failing. And I think it comes down to really being able to re-architect and rethink your organization from an application standpoint. And security is a part of that. If you are now deploying an application or a product that requires somebody to be able to access it and provide it to customers, and you're having AI integrated into it, how is that being managed? How do you basically look to cater? And so all of that tooling, from observability to identity and others, all of those need to be taken into account. And that's seeming to be a topic of conversation amongst the CIO and CISO community on a regular basis.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's so very well said. And if I could add maybe two additional things that from my end, one an anecdote and one a trend that I think is very critical. From the perspective of Cerby, one of the other ways to think about Cerby is, we've all probably seen that metric that anywhere between 85 to 90% of the data that we have in the enterprise is unstructured, right? Yes. It's in a form that we're not able to access. And so what is so exciting about generative AI capabilities is the ability to programmatically and automatically go and find that data and structure it and activate it. And we're recording this middle of January in 2026. There's a lot of conversation going on right now around the context graph, right? That those that own the context graph are the ones that are actually going to be the ones that win the AI race. I mean, obviously NVIDIA, et cetera, they're in a league of their own, but outside of those folks, if you can build that context graph, and for CIOs, for CISOs, those of you on the technology side within your businesses, being able to activate that unstructured data, build that context graph, that not only helps you internally, it also helps you turn around and create a much better product, and more importantly, a much better customer experience. And so that's something that, for us as a last mile identity product, we're doing our part to activate the part of the overall graph that historically has had unstructured data. And then, the anecdote that I wanted to share is, we're a growing team. We closed our Series B early last year, I should say, $54 million round. And, we're expanding into new regions. We brought in a new CFO. And one of my favorite AI stories that I've shared is our CFO vibe coded our pricing calculator. Wow. And how cool is that, right? I mean, he turned that around and iterated on it. And so the level of productivity, the level of experimentation that it's allowing when safely deployed is something that's tremendously just great to see. So I'm going to propose we transition to the Q&A section now, Yousuf,
yes,
if that's okay with you.
So
Terry, I'm going to, and we already covered this next slide, so we'll go ahead and skip it. But Terry, back over to you before we jump into the Q&A section.
Thanks, Bill. Really great context and perspective, and even great guidance on building and managing identity in today's enterprises. Thank you both for that. Really, you set up the Q&A really sweetly. So we have some audience questions, but before we go there, just as a reminder to our audience, to participate in the Q&A, strangely enough, you type your question into that text box located to the right of the presentation window. You can also click on that Q&A icon question mark at the bottom of the screen. If for some reason we can't get to all the submitted questions, we'll be sharing them with our speakers who can reply offline. So let's see here. We've got a question from Vikram in our audience. He's asking, how do we measure the effectiveness of maturity of identity platform and identity as a security perimeter? He notes that with firewalls, you can effectively show what the external domains, IPs, DDoS sources, intrusion sources are. With identity, how do you show the same? What are some powerful metrics that are emerging in this new world that we're discussing right now?
I can provide a perspective on that if that's okay.
Thanks, Yousuf. Yeah.
One word: coverage. Okay, so think about your application landscape. Think about what the most high priority of those are, the most expensive of those applications are, and think about what coverage you have from where the identity management is locked down. If you think about it from that perspective, you are able to both prioritize, and then you are able to work through a program to be able to sort of close it up. Some of that can be automated. Some of that can be driven by a particular tools, either native within the application or otherwise. But that's how you basically are able to demonstrate coverage. The way, the analogy to think about it is, if you are looking to be able to make sure that each of your perimeter is secure, you've got to think about where the most vulnerable pieces are, and that the analogy you've used to firewall is consistent with that. If you think the data firewall, if we call it that, or the customer experience firewall, if we want to call that in specific applications you have, they also need to be covered, and they are exposed in very, very specific areas. It could be as basic as the fact that there are external third parties that are accessing core applications. Maybe using, for example, in Bell's example, marketing agencies looking to be able to look at product marketing or social media accounts for a company. That's just very, very common. And it could well be that you have former employees or third-party contractors asking your core application and how that's basically typically managed, right? And so I do think that being able to have a workflow attached to it, being able to have that programmatically done, and now with the power of AI, actually doing that autonomously is real and possible now. And I think that could be done. So that's the way I would look at it.
Absolutely. And if I could add 2 points there. First, on that point about coverage, absolutely, so well said. We do a lot of work across highly regulated industries, and we have a big pharmaceuticals company as a customer, and chatting with their head of governance, risk, and compliance. One of the things that person said was, the fewer risk exceptions I have that are identity related, the better off I am and we are. And so it is this person's goal to get that down to zero. but that's transformational, right? If as part of their review, they have 0 risk exceptions or entries in the risk registry relating to identity. And so that's one of the metrics that they take a look at. And then we also do a fair amount of work with SIs and VARs. And, I've always been blown away by how they're able to, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but reduce the identity programs to effectively the unit economics. And one of the things that's often talked about is, what is the additional cost of achieving 1% more coverage or 2% more coverage? Like, what's the financial model behind it? And so one of the really exciting things that we're seeing now with modern AI technologies is that the unit economics are actually improving around adding one additional application integration that's part of your identity perimeter, where it used to be maybe $50,000, $100,000 to protect that additional application. And then you do the math and the cost benefit isn't there. Now, with systems like Cerby, you're able to bring that down to $500 per application or $1,000 per application. And so it becomes effectively criminal negligence, I would argue, not to protect all your applications when the cost per app is just that much, much lower. And so efficiency of running your program is where I'm going with that second point.
Yeah. Thanks, Bel. Bel, let's stick with you. This makes me think or wonder about security practices in identity management that may have once worked really, really well, but don't really hold up in this era where things are changing really fast. The attackers are getting more sophisticated. AI is as we've pounded the nail in here, just really, really changing everything. What are some of the ones that you would point to that may be outmoded or maybe even obsolete at this point?
For me, it's I'm constantly impressed, surprised, horrified by how much inertia there is around how certain things operate within the modern identity stack and what expectations are. We will chat with identity teams and they will say, yeah, it takes, we average about 4 days to turn around an app approval process. And that it blows my mind, right? The idea that I want to get access to an application and I might need to wait 4 business days for it. And so maybe what I would emphasize, and Yousuf, I appreciate your thoughts on this, is it's the expectations around what a next generation identity system can look like with regard to the end user experience. You shouldn't have to wait 4 business days to get access to an application. The end user shouldn't have to be on the hook to enable MFA for all of their mission critical systems. A lot of this can be automated. You can remove the dependency on the human 9 times out of 10 for any manual compensating control you have. And so platforms like Cerby have gotten really good at working with IT teams and security teams and identity teams to take that weight off the shoulders of the end users and IT teams, because you can automate it.
Yousuf, a question for you. Continuing with the AI thread, talk about what you can foresee with various threat vectors, where you think attackers will use AI to really take it to the identity teams during the next year. I mean, this has been a target for at least the last 5 years. Identity is obviously really the keys to the kingdom, but what sorts of tactics or strategies can you see on the horizon here?
Well, I would argue that identity is probably, after phishing, the number 2 security threat to companies now than ever before. And the reason for that is a large part of the AI piece to it. So let's go through that a little bit. So one is the sheer power of compute and then intelligence means that you are able to be much more sophisticated in your identity attacks that you're looking to basically do. Let's look at that in multiple ways. One is, of course, constantly mutating and being sophistication on the phishing side of things and the identity of what you're able to try and access. That's one piece, and being able to look at different configurations and do that at a pretty rapid pace. Second, classic in terms of dictionary attacks, and those being able to do for password cracking in some way, shape, or form. If you do not have good cybersecurity posture, identity posture, you're likely to get breached. Three, there's a new one, which is deep fakes. So the use of AI to ultimately be able to replicate a personality and do that with a degree of sophistication. That's an identity problem. It's not, and that's an AI being used to be able to fake an identity. That is, the impacts of that are disastrous. There is ways for intellectual property theft, of course, and then some. Of course, financial theft. That's consistently being a major issue. And then, of course, just the fact that you've got such it's a public relations disaster, and we've seen a number of these being put into place. And I think the other piece is, you're using AI to be able to fake, say, voice or otherwise. And I think, you can use AI to automate, for example, your call center process in some way, shape, or form, but you're also going to be using it the other way to be able to start, replicating, parts of, an identity, whether it's on voice, whether it's on video, and of course, in the traditional ways. So I think the general notion is that whilst look, technology, as it shifts, will provide you with lots of benefits, as we've seen, but it also provides you with adversarial tactics being deployed by nefarious actors. And so that, unfortunately, is a consequence of when you have a major technology shift. And so that's some of those examples would not have happened without AI, but they are now happening now more than ever before. And that's just a consequence of it.
It's crazy that these technological advancements, I mean, it ends up being the spy versus spy scenarios where these advancements ends up getting used against the defenders, but that's the world we live in. Excuse me. Bel, to bring you back into this, agentic AI is, of course, a really popular and provocative topic that industry and customers are all looking at, and its potential and its peril and everything in between. Can agentic AI actually help solve this disconnected app problem, or is it still not tested enough that security teams can rely on it? What's your sense there?
Absolutely. I'm not one to be a doomer, and so please don't take my response as indicating any of that. What we always need to be mindful of with agentic technologies is that you should always keep the task in mind, and then also evaluate your tolerance for hallucinations. Right? Your typical agent may hallucinate anywhere between 10 to 40% of the time, and when you're dealing with identity workflows, my argument is you can't even tolerate a 0.01% hallucination rate. What if the agent inadvertently puts the credential set in the wrong field, or permissions the user incorrectly? And so when we've looked at agentic technologies here at Cerby and how we deploy it, there's absolutely a role for it. But architecturally, we've made sure that there's a reinforcing deterministic layer that basically runs alongside the agents who build our workflows. And so how would I generalize that? Agentic technologies are amazing, but you need to be smart about how you deploy them. And if there is a workflow you're working on where you cannot afford variability, you should avoid using the agentic technologies there. And that's how we've employed the technology set in our stack, that we ensure that anytime we're running a mission critical workflow, the outcome is always deterministic, but then there's a separate loop that helps remove the reliance on humans to perfect anything that humans would otherwise be responsible for.
Fair enough. Yousuf, I'm going to turn back to you and ask you to put your CIO hat back on for just a moment. Really curious about how, as a CIO, how you decided which security initiatives got budget, especially when you have to juggle amongst so many competing priorities. I mean, obviously everything can be urgent, right? But what were some of the criteria that you used to decide really where to spend budget?
So first and foremost it came down to putting the customer at the heart of your decision making. What will impact and where is the customer most at risk? So that was the overarching viewpoint to do it. Second was to then balance that out with level of complexity. of what it takes to be able to to be able to make that work. There's lots of things that you want to be able to do, but they're super complex to do. There's interdependencies with potentially finding a new solution, or working with an existing vendor, or being able to work with a specific part of the organization that requires to do a major change, or whatever that may be. And so you then basically have to balance that out with level of complexity of effort. And then the third is where you feel and that it could basically make a difference. And that really comes from CIO instincts. It comes from CIO experience of being able to walk around the organization, look around the application landscape, and ask yourself where you can basically make a difference. The fourth is much more about research. So one of the things that I was able to do is to say, look, if I was able to talk to a vendor, and Bell had basically mentioned that on average, enterprises have 317 applications. I think that's low. I mean, I can tell you that when I worked at an early stage startup, which was less than 100 people, we probably had close to 250 applications itself. And that was, of course, an engineering-led product, but still, the reality is that number is only going to increase. And I don't think it includes some of the AI agent tools that's being included in that. So I digress, but part of it is, as you speak to vendors, you also need to be able to ascertain and understand. This is not a typical, a bridge letter and here's a little SOC 2 Type 2 report. It's actually about like, hey, what's their security organization? Has that increased over time? What's their investment? Or have their, partner or salespeople are able to talk about the improvements? One of the things that you notice from some of the biggest vendors out there, I think they did a phenomenal job, is when you showed up at their, say, annual conference, or you spoke to anyone on the team, they were enabled to be able to talk about what they were doing. And I thought that was super impressive, and that resonated to the fact that security was a part of their organization and a large part of their culture that was being built into place, and that gave me heart. So if I basically took those four things, somewhere down the line, I was able to help prioritize where I would garner the effort to be able to try and move it forward. What I would say is identity management is a incremental strategy. It is not an end destination. It will be multifaceted, it's complex, it's heavy to basically change. And some of the solutions that you get out there are able to help do that. I think one of the things that I was excited about Cerby is that there was a very clear path to success. It said, you have 300 applications, you have a single sign-on provider that we integrate with super well. Let's be able to make sure that we can take your security practices and take your identity management policy and strategy, and to be able to bridge that gap with all of these unmanaged applications which haven't been fit for purpose, and we can do that. And that is a clear measure of success. When you get that coverage, that's able to do it. And in that period, some are federally mandated and it's super complex to do. So you deprioritize that and maybe do it later on. Some are more critical and you're like, okay, let me try and basically do that. But that's one of the things that you need to do as a general rule. Those are the vectors I would advise people to do.
Thank you. Bell, close us out, if you will, with some thoughts around how IAM leaders can future-proof or use future-proofing principles to guide their decisions in 2026, and why you feel that way. Love to hear your closing thoughts on that.
Yeah, as over the last 2 to 3 years, we've been doing far more work on the identity governance side of things, and many of you, identity leaders, IT leaders, cybersecurity leaders, probably will not be surprised by just how many programs stall out after phase one, and they never get beyond protecting, the mission critical applications to the slightly less mission critical applications, right? They're usually only able to cover 30 to 40% of their enterprise applications, and so one of the concepts that I would maybe plant a seed around is 100% coverage is possible, and in an economically viable way where it would be foolish not to pursue 100%. Now, it's not going to happen immediately and overnight, but it is possible to get to a place where your attack surface does benefit, and I'm talking by attack surface, I'm referring to enterprise applications and their general identity security posture. It is possible to bring all of them within the identity perimeter. Modern AI technologies allow you to make up for the gaps that those applications present. And that's exactly what the problem that Cerby solves. We can help you connect all of your applications to an Okta, to a SailPoint, to an Entra ID. And so 100% coverage is possible. And maybe your target isn't 100%, but maybe it's 90% and you're at 30, we can close that gap.
Excellent. Well, that is going to close us off. I want to thank both Bel Lepe and Yousuf Khan for their comments today. Dark Reading appreciates your time and expertise on managing identity in a very turbulent time with AI rearranging the landscape as we speak. Thank you both, gentlemen.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Yousuf.
Thank you, Terry. Take care. Thanks.
Thank you as well to our sponsor, Cerby, as well as everyone in the audience. We appreciate your attention and participation and your questions. Sometime in the next 24 hours, you'll be receiving a personalized follow-up email with a link to today's presentation on demand. You're welcome to share this with peers and colleagues who couldn't have been part of our live presentation. Now for the boilerplate, this webinar is copyright 2026 by Informa Tech Target. Presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by Dark Reading and Cerby. Individual speakers solely responsible for their content and opinions. On behalf of our guests, Cerby and the Dark Reading team, I'm Terry Sweeney. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.